I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was angry. Anger is loud. This was quieter than that. This was something colder, heavier. The kind of clarity that settles in when you finally understand the rules of the game you've been playing without knowing it was a game at all. By the time the sun came up, I had stopped asking why. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was focused. The next morning, I showed up to work exactly the same way I always had. Same time, same neutral expression, same polite smile. I said good morning to everyone. I congratulated Lily on her new responsibilities when I passed her desk. Her smile froze for half a second before she thanked me. That half second told me everything. She knew. She had known before I did. I went to my desk and opened my inbox. There were already emails waiting for me. Questions, problems, requests for help. Things Lily was technically responsible for now, but still couldn't handle on her own. I responded calmly, professionally. I didn't push back. I didn't correct her publicly. I didn't argue with Mark or HR. I let them believe I had accepted it. That was the first mistake they made, because what they didn't realize was that my value had never been visible on the surface. It wasn't in my title. It wasn't in my job description. It wasn't in the meetings they stopped inviting me to. It was in the invisible things, the things no one noticed until they broke. I spent the first week observing. I watched how Lily operated without me guiding her every step. I noticed how often she came to my desk with questions framed as casual conversation. "Hey, quick question," she'd say. "You don't mind, right?" I always answered. Just enough. Not wrong. Not incomplete. Just general. I stopped offering context. I stopped anticipating problems. I stopped saving people from mistakes before they happened. That alone changed everything. Small delays started piling up. Clients followed up twice instead of once. Reports were submitted late. A system update stalled because someone didn't know which approval chain to use. Nothing catastrophic. Yet, Mark started getting tense. He hovered more, asked more questions, sent emails late at night. Lily started working longer hours. She stopped smiling as much. At home, Aaron noticed a change in me immediately. "You seem lighter," he said one evening while we washed dishes. I shrugged. I stopped doing extra. He frowned. "Is that safe?" I looked at him and didn't answer, because safe had never protected me before. My mother called that night too, stressed about a letter she didn't understand. Normally, I would have driven over, sat with her, sorted it out. Instead, I talked her through it over the phone. She sounded disappointed. I felt guilty for about 10 seconds. Then I remembered how many times I had emptied myself for people who didn't even notice. At work, HR followed up with a formal document outlining my new scope. I read it carefully, compared it to my original contract, highlighted discrepancies. They had reduced my authority without formally changing my responsibilities. That was sloppy. I saved copies, screenshots, time-stamped downloads. Then I did something I hadn't done in 8 years. I stopped correcting errors that weren't officially mine to fix. The first real crack showed during a client escalation meeting. A major account flagged inconsistencies in reporting. Numbers didn't match across systems. Lily tried to explain, stumbled, then looked at me instinctively. Everyone did. I met her eyes and waited. She cleared her throat and continued, guessing her way through an answer that sounded confident but wasn't true. The client asked follow-up questions. She couldn't answer them. Mark jumped in, flustered, promising a review. After the meeting, he pulled me aside. "Why didn't you help?" he asked quietly. "I wasn't asked," I said. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. That was the moment he realized something had shifted. Lily started avoiding me after that. She stopped asking questions. She started making decisions on her own. Bad ones. She rerouted a process she didn't fully understand to save time. It caused a backlog that took days to untangle. She approved a vendor change without checking historical issues. That vendor had failed us before, something I knew because I had handled the fallout years earlier. No one asked me, so I said nothing. Mark called another meeting. This time HR joined. They framed it as growing pains. They suggested I mentor Lily more closely. I nodded and smiled. Then I asked a simple question. Is mentoring part of my revised role? The room went quiet. HR shuffled papers. Mark cleared his throat. Well, not explicitly, he said. Then I'll need that added formally, I replied, along with compensation aligned to training responsibilities. They didn't expect that. They asked for time to discuss. That time never came. Instead, Lily was given more authority. Faster, louder, more visible. They doubled down. That was their second mistake. Because pressure exposes cracks. And Lily was cracking. She started snapping at junior staff. Missed deadlines. Sent panicked messages late at night that went unanswered because I had stopped checking email after hours. One afternoon, I overheard her crying in the bathroom. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt confirmation. At home, Aaron and I fought more. Money stress. Pride. His job search dragging on. My quiet withdrawal confusing him. You're not even trying to fix things, he accused one night. I fixed everything for years, I said. I'm tired. He didn't understand, but for once I didn't explain. Then came the audit notice. It arrived without warning. External compliance review. Mandatory. Company-wide. Mark looked like he hadn't slept in days. I read the email twice and smiled for the first time in weeks. Because audits don't care about titles. They care about processes. And processes tell stories. Stories about who built them, who maintained them, who broke them. The auditors requested documentation. Lots of it. Ownership trails, version histories, approval logs. Mark sent a company-wide request asking everyone to cooperate. Lily forwarded it to me with a short message. Do you have any of this? I stared at the screen. I had all of it. Every version. Every note. Every email chain showing decisions I made. Risks I flagged. Shortcuts I prevented. I replied politely. Yes, I'll provide what falls under my current scope. Her reply took longer this time. What does that mean? It means I'll submit materials I'm responsible for, I said. Anything outside that should come from the lead. She didn't respond. The audit interviews began. One by one, people were pulled into conference rooms. Nervous whispers filled the office. Mark paced. HR whispered. When it was my turn, I walked in calm. The auditor asked clear questions. Who designed this workflow? Who approved this change? Who maintained oversight? I answered honestly. I didn't embellish. I didn't accuse. I simply told the truth. And the truth had timestamps. When Lily went in later that day, she came out pale. Mark avoided eye contact with everyone. At home, Aaron noticed the tension on my face. Something's happening, he said. I nodded. For once, I replied. It's not my job to stop it. The audit stretched into a second week. Findings piled up. Gaps. Oversights. Decisions made without proper review. Decisions Lily had made. I didn't know I was training my replacement. That's the part that still messes with my head. Because if I had known, even a little, I would have slowed down. I would have missed steps. I would have protected myself. I would have asked questions instead of saying yes the way I always did. But I didn't know, and they counted on that. At the time, I thought I was being trusted. I thought I was being respected. I thought I was finally safe. I had been at that company for 8 years. 8 years of arriving early, staying late, covering for people who didn't show up, fixing mistakes that weren't mine, smoothing over conflicts so management wouldn't have to deal with them. 8 years of being reliable, which is just another word for invisible when you're a woman who doesn't complain. My job title sounded impressive on paper. Operations lead. In reality, I was the glue. I knew how everything worked because I had to. When someone was out sick, I stepped in. When systems crashed, I stayed until midnight. When clients were angry, I absorbed it. I trained every new hire who came through our department because management said I was good with people. What they really meant was I didn't say no. So when my director, Mark, called me into his office one Monday morning and smiled like he was doing me a favor, I didn't feel threatened. I felt tired but proud. "We're bringing in someone to support you," he said, folding his hands like this was great news. "You've been carrying too much." I remember laughing because I thought he was joking. Support. That word hit me like relief. I didn't even ask who. I didn't ask why now, after years of being stretched thin. I just nodded and said that would be amazing. He told me her name was Lily. "She's sharp," he said. "Fresh perspective. But she'll need guidance. I want you to show her the ropes." Of course he did. Lily showed up the following week. Mid-20s. Polished. Soft-spoken. Always smiling like she was slightly nervous but eager to please. She reminded me of myself when I first started, back when I still believed hard work spoke for itself. I took her under my wing immediately. I showed her how our systems actually worked, not the outdated manuals HR handed out. I taught her the shortcuts, the workarounds, the things you only learn after years of being burned. I explained who to CC on emails and who to avoid. I warned her which managers smiled in meetings but blamed people in private. She listened closely, took notes, asked smart questions. She thanked me constantly. "You're so good at this," she'd say. "I don't know how you keep everything straight." I smiled when she said things like that. I liked feeling useful. I liked being respected. What I didn't realize was that she wasn't being trained to support me. She was being trained to replace me. At home, things weren't exactly calm either. My husband, Aaron, had been laid off 6 months earlier. The job market was brutal, and every rejection hit him harder than the last. I picked up more financial weight without complaint. I told myself this was what partnership looked like when things got hard. But stress changes people. Aaron became quieter, short-tempered, defensive about small things. When I came home exhausted, he'd ask why I was always tired, like it was a personal failure instead of the result of holding everything together. My mother had also started calling more often. She needed help with paperwork, medical appointments, little emergencies that weren't really emergencies but felt urgent to her. I was the dependable one in my family too, the one who handled things. So when work started bleeding into my evenings, when Lily started copying me on emails I didn't even know existed yet, I told myself it was temporary. Growing pains. Support in progress. There were small signs I ignored, like how Mark stopped inviting me to certain meetings, or how Lily started attending them instead, then filling me in afterward. She just wanted exposure, Mark said when I asked. "You're already established." Or how my feedback started getting filtered through her. "Lily mentioned this could be more efficient," Mark said once, pointing at a process I had built from scratch. I stared at him. "That's the system I designed." He waved it off. "Right, but she brought it up." I laughed it off at first. That's what I do. I rationalize. I smooth. I assume good intentions. But something felt off. One afternoon, I overheard Lily on a call in a conference room. The door was half open. She was explaining a workflow to someone, confidently, clearly using my language, my phrases, my examples. I stood there longer than I should have. She didn't mention my name. That night, I told Aaron about it while we ate dinner. He shrugged. "You've been there forever," he said. "They can't just replace you." I wanted to believe that. Weeks passed. Lily's responsibilities expanded quickly. Too quickly. She started handling client communications without looping me in. She was praised publicly in meetings for initiative. Meanwhile, my workload didn't decrease. It increased. I was training her during the day and cleaning up fires at night. I was exhausted. Then HR emailed me. It was a simple message. A calendar invite. Role alignment discussion. No context. No explanation. I remember staring at my screen, my stomach tightening. I forwarded it to Aaron, adding a smiley face like I wasn't nervous. "It's probably a promotion," he texted back. "I wish." The meeting lasted 12 minutes. HR smiled too much. Mark avoided eye contact. They told me the company was restructuring. They told me my role was evolving. They told me Lily would be taking on a lead position, and my responsibilities would be refocused. Refocused was code for downgraded. Lower pay, less authority, same workload. I asked why this was happening. Mark finally looked at me then. "Lily has demonstrated strong leadership," he said, "and adaptability." I felt something crack inside my chest. "I trained her," I said quietly. He nodded. "Exactly." They expected me to accept it gracefully. They expected gratitude. They expected silence. I went home in a fog. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall while Aaron talked about cutting expenses. That night, I opened my laptop. Not to job search. Not to complain. I opened my files. 8 years of documentation. Emails. Process guides. Access logs. Training materials. Versions of workflows that showed timestamps, authorship, revisions. Patterns. I had kept everything. Because that's who I am. Organized. Thorough. Quietly prepared. And as I started clicking through folders, something became clear. They didn't just underestimate me. They forgot who built the foundation they were standing on. And I realized something else too. Revenge didn't have to be loud. It just had to be permanent. Decisions Mark had approved. Decisions that never would have happened under my watch. HR called me into another meeting. This time they looked nervous. They asked how I was feeling about my role. I told them I was aligned with my contract. They asked if I'd consider stepping back into leadership temporarily. I smiled. "Only if the role and authority are restored formally," I said, "with backdated compensation." They asked for time. Again, this time I knew better. Because the thing about quiet revenge is this. You don't rush it. You let people walk themselves into consequences they thought you were protecting them from. And they had no idea how permanent those consequences were about to be. By the 3rd week of the audit, the office no longer felt like a workplace. It felt like a waiting room. People spoke in lowered voices. Conversations stopped when certain managers walked by. Doors stayed closed longer than usual. Calendars filled up with private reviews and process clarifications. No one laughed anymore. The tension wasn't loud. It hummed. Mark stopped pretending everything was fine. He started asking questions again. Not casually, desperately. He wanted explanations for things he had signed off on without reading. He wanted timelines. He wanted accountability. He wanted reassurance that none of this would come back on him. He came to my desk late one afternoon, standing too close, speaking too quietly. "You've always been good at anticipating issues," he said. "If there's anything you think we should get ahead of—" I looked up at him and waited. He swallowed. Anything that might be misunderstood. I understood exactly what he was asking, and I answered carefully. "I documented everything according to policy," I said. "That's what the auditors asked for." He nodded slowly, as if trying to calculate something. Then he walked away. Lily, on the other hand, was unraveling. She was still technically my manager now, at least on paper, but the confidence she'd worn like armor was gone. Her emails were shorter, her tone sharper. She delegated aggressively, pushing work downward, trying to create distance between herself and the decisions under review. She stopped acknowledging me altogether, until she didn't. It happened on a Thursday morning. She stood at my desk, arms crossed, eyes red like she hadn't slept. "Did you tell them I built those workflows?" she asked. I blinked once. "I told them who built what," I replied. "That's not what I asked." I leaned back in my chair, calm, measured. They asked specific questions. I answered them honestly. She stared at me like she was trying to see something new. "You could have framed it differently," she said. You didn't have to make it sound like I didn't know what I was doing. I let the silence stretch. I didn't frame anything, I said. I didn't editorialize. I didn't speculate. Her jaw tightened. You knew what would happen, she said. I nodded slightly. Yes, I said. I did. Her voice dropped. They're blaming me. I didn't respond. They're saying I moved too fast, that I didn't consult the right people. I still said nothing. They're acting like I did this alone. I finally spoke. Did you? Her eyes flicked away. She exhaled sharply and straightened. This isn't over, she said. No, I agreed. It isn't. She walked away shaking. That interaction stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because I felt bad, but because I realized something important. She wasn't the architect of what happened to me. She was the tool. That didn't make her innocent, but it did explain the speed, the recklessness, the way she'd been pushed forward without guardrails. She had been positioned, promoted too fast, given authority without protection, set up to absorb impact. And now the company was watching her sink. At home, Aaron noticed my distraction. You barely talk anymore, he said one night. It's like you're already gone. I was sitting on the couch, laptop open, reviewing another request from the auditors. I'm not gone, I said. I'm just not fixing things. He didn't like that answer. He paced. I'm trying to get back on my feet, he said. And everything feels like it's falling apart at the same time. I closed my laptop and looked at him. I've held everything together for a long time, I said quietly. Including you. That landed harder than I expected. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he didn't argue. The audit findings began circulating internally before they were officially released. Nothing explicit, just hints, whispers, process failures, leadership gaps, insufficient oversight. HR scheduled one-on-ones with key staff. Lily stopped being invited to certain meetings. Then came the email. Mandatory leadership review. Attendance required. Lily sat across from me in the conference room, arms folded, staring at the table. Mark sat at the head, pale. HR spoke first. They thanked everyone for cooperation. They talked about accountability. They talked about alignment. They talked about learning opportunities. Then they talked about consequences. Lily's name came up early. They framed it as support. A step back. A reevaluation. Temporary reassignment. No longer lead. Her face drained of color. She looked at Mark. He didn't look back. Then HR turned to me. They asked if I'd be willing to stabilize operations during the transition. They didn't call it a promotion. They didn't apologize. They didn't acknowledge what had been done to me. They just assumed I would fix it. The old me would have. The old me would have nodded and said yes for the good of the team. Instead, I asked one question. Under what title and compensation? The room froze. HR blinked. Mark shifted. They hadn't prepared for that. We can discuss, HR started. No, I said calmly. We can define it. Silence. Finally, HR nodded. We'll formalize it, she said. Lily stood abruptly. So this is it, she asked, voice shaking. You push me out and step back in. I met her eyes. I didn't push you anywhere, I said. You stepped into something you didn't understand. She laughed, sharp and bitter. They set me up, she said, and you let it happen. I didn't deny it. I stopped protecting people who didn't protect me, I said. She left the room, crying. That afternoon, Mark called me into his office again. This time there was no smile. No games, he said. Do you want the role back or not? I leaned forward. I want the role, I said, with authority restored, pay corrected, and clarity documented. He stared at me. You've changed, he said. Yes, I replied. So have my boundaries. He agreed, not because he respected me, but because he needed me. The official announcement went out the next day, carefully worded. No mention of demotion, no apology, just organizational realignment. People congratulated me quietly. Some avoided eye contact. Lily didn't show up. HR later announced she was pursuing other opportunities. No goodbye email. No farewell meeting. Just gone. And yet, the damage wasn't done. Because audits don't end cleanly. They leave trails. The external report was finalized the following week. Mark was called into a closed-door meeting. So was HR. So was legal. I wasn't invited. But I didn't need to be. Because the consequences didn't stop at Lily. They never do. Aaron came home one night with a job offer in hand. I hugged him. I was happy for him. But something between us felt different. I wasn't the same person he'd leaned on. And he knew it. Later that night, lying awake, I thought about everything that had happened. How quietly it had unfolded. How predictable it all was in hindsight. They thought replacing me would be efficient. They thought knowledge was transferable without cost. They thought loyalty was automatic. They forgot something critical. People like me don't explode. We withdraw. And when we do, the systems built on our silence start to fail. Quietly. Permanently. Once Lily disappeared, the office tried to pretend she'd never existed. No goodbye email. No farewell cake. Her name stopped coming up in meetings, like it had been erased with a careful backspace. HR referred to her exit as a transition. Mark avoided questions. People adjusted, the way they always do when someone falls out of favor. But the audit didn't forget her. And it didn't forget Mark. The external firm sent a follow-up request that landed in my inbox late on a Tuesday afternoon. Additional documentation. Leadership approvals. Decision rationale. I recognized the file names immediately. They were asking for the moments where discretion had been used instead of policy. The gray areas. The places where Mark had waved things through because he trusted me to handle it, then later handed that authority to Lily without context. I forwarded the request to legal, copied HR, and waited. Mark came to my desk within 10 minutes. He didn't sit down. "We need to talk," he said. I stood, grabbed my notebook, and followed him into his office. The door closed behind us with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. "This is getting serious," he said, rubbing his temples. "Legal is nervous." I nodded. "They should be," I said. He looked up sharply. "I need you to help frame this," he said. "You know how these things work. You know how decisions actually get made." "Yes," I said. "I do." And he pressed. "And framing isn't my role," I replied. "Accuracy is." He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "You're enjoying this," he said. "No," I said honestly. "I'm respecting it." That seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. He exhaled. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "You've always been loyal." There it was. The word they use when they want free protection. "I've been professional," I corrected. "There's a difference." He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "If this goes the wrong way," he said, "it could affect everyone." I met his gaze. "It already has," I said. "Legal scheduled interviews. This time they weren't informal. There were calendars blocked, documents requested in advance, and warnings about confidentiality. I prepared the way I always do. Thoroughly. I didn't rehearse lies. I didn't spin narratives. I reviewed facts. When the interview came, I answered clearly. Who authorized this? Mark. Who bypassed review? Mark. Who raised concerns? Me. Who documented them? Me. Who overrode them? Mark. The lawyer thanked me for my time. 2 days later, HR sent out a company-wide email announcing Mark would be taking a leave of absence. No timeline, no explanation, just a vague note about personal matters. People speculated quietly. I didn't. I already knew. Without Mark, things moved faster. Too fast. HR tried to step into leadership, decisions they weren't equipped to handle. Processes stalled. Approvals piled up. They came back to me again, this time with urgency. They offered a revised contract. Everything I had asked for. Title restored. Pay corrected. Authority documented. No apology. I signed it anyway, not because I forgave them, but because I wanted the record to reflect the truth. At home, Aaron started his new job. The shift in our household dynamic was noticeable immediately. He had structure again, confidence, less edge in his voice. But I noticed something else too. He didn't need me the same way, and I didn't offer myself automatically anymore. One night he asked if everything at work was finally settled. I thought about it. No, I said, but it's stable. He nodded. That's good, he said. We sat in silence after that. Not uncomfortable, just different. The audit findings were officially released internally at the end of the month. They were sanitized, carefully worded, but if you knew how to read them, the message was clear. Leadership failures, oversight lapses, systemic dependency on undocumented expertise. That last one made me smile, because my expertise had been documented. They just hadn't bothered to look. The board got involved. That's when things stopped being quiet. Executives visited the office, observed, asked questions. I was invited to meetings again, not as an afterthought, as a necessity. One board member asked how knowledge transfer had been handled during recent leadership changes. I answered honestly. It was assumed, I said, not structured. She nodded slowly. Assumptions cost money. Then came the call. Legal asked if I would be willing to provide a formal statement. Not internal, external. I agreed. Aaron noticed my hesitation when I told him. Is that risky? He asked. No, I said. It's necessary. He studied me. You're not afraid anymore, he said. I shook my head. I'm done being. The statement took hours. I detailed everything. Dates, decisions, warnings, responses. I didn't accuse. I documented. 2 weeks later, Mark resigned. Not announced. Not celebrated. Just gone. HR quietly restructured. Policies changed. Mandatory documentation was enforced. Training protocols were updated. Things I had been pushing for years suddenly became priorities. I was asked to lead the implementation. This time I set boundaries. Clear ones. And they listened, because they had learned something the hard way. At home, my mother asked why I sounded different lately. Stronger. I told her I stopped absorbing things that weren't mine to carry. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I wish I'd learned that earlier. So did I. One evening, Aaron asked if I was happy. I thought about Lily, about Mark, about the quiet way everything had collapsed around the assumption that I would always clean up the mess. I'm at peace, I said. That's new. He smiled, and I realized something important. Revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like correction, like systems fixed too late to save the people who broke them. And the thing about quiet revenge? It doesn't end with fireworks. It ends with absence. People gone. Paths closed. Doors that never reopen. And no one can trace it back to you, because all you did was stop carrying what was never yours to begin with. I thought Lily was gone for good. That's what everyone assumed. Once someone leaves under those circumstances, the company scrubs their name, rewrites the narrative, and moves on. No one reaches back. No one asks what happened after. I didn't either. Not at first. Work stabilized faster than I expected. With authority restored and boundaries enforced, the chaos settled into something manageable. The systems worked again, not because I was doing more, but because I was doing exactly what the role required. No extra labor, no invisible fixes, just structure. People adjusted. Some resented it, some respected it, most just adapted. That's the thing about organizations. They don't miss people, they miss functions. At home, Aaron and I were still recalibrating. He was back in the rhythm of work, coming home with stories again, complaints about coworkers, little victories that reminded him who he used to be. I listened, but I didn't absorb them the way I used to. I noticed he waited now, waited for me to offer help instead of assuming I would. That shift alone told me how deeply I'd trained everyone in my life to lean on me without question. Then Lily emailed me. The subject line was simple. "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time. My first instinct was to delete it. My second was curiosity. I didn't reply immediately. I finished my day, closed my laptop, made dinner, sat with Erin, let the house settle into quiet before opening my email again. The message was short. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't understood what she was stepping into. She said she'd been told I was burnt out, resistant to change, ready to step back. She said she believed it. She asked if we could talk. I read it twice, then a third time. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired, but I agreed. We met at a coffee shop near the office. Neutral ground, public, safe. She looked different, less polished, more fragile, like someone who'd learned how quickly confidence evaporates when it's not anchored to competence. She didn't smile when she saw me. She looked relieved. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. I nodded and sat. We ordered coffee. Small talk lingered awkwardly between us, then dissolved. "I didn't know," she said finally, "about how much you carried." I watched her carefully. "You knew enough," I replied. She flinched. "They told me you were coasting," she said, "that the team needed energy, that you didn't want the pressure anymore." I laughed softly. "That's interesting," I said, "considering I was doing 2 jobs." She nodded quickly. "I see that now." I waited. "They promised support," she continued. "They said Mark would be hands-on, that legal would back decisions, that I'd have you as a resource. And when that didn't happen?" I asked. She swallowed. "I panicked," she said, "and I made decisions I shouldn't have." "Yes," I said, "you did." She met my eyes. "I lost everything," she said. "My reputation, my confidence, my job." I didn't respond right away. I thought about the nights I'd cried in my car before driving home, the holidays I'd worked through, the quiet erosion of my marriage before I even noticed it happening. "I lost things too," I said. She nodded. "I know," she said. I wanted you to hear it from me." I appreciated that. But appreciation doesn't erase damage. "Why now?" I asked. She hesitated. "Because I keep replaying it," she said. "And I realize I never should have accepted that role without understanding why it was suddenly available." I took a slow breath. "People don't get promoted into stability," I said. "They get promoted into problems." She laughed weakly. "I wish I'd known that." We sat in silence for a moment. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. "Do you hate me?" I considered it honestly. "No," I said, "but I don't trust you either." She nodded like she expected that. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just didn't want to disappear without saying something." When we stood to leave, she looked smaller than she had when I first trained her. Not because she was weak, because she was no longer protected by illusion. I walked back to my car feeling oddly lighter, not because of closure, but because I'd stopped carrying a version of the story that made me responsible for everyone else's choices. At work, the long-term consequences were becoming clearer. Replacing me hadn't just destabilized operations. It had exposed a structural flaw. Too much institutional knowledge had lived in one person, me. The board mandated redundancy planning, cross-training, documentation audits, things I'd recommended for years. Too late to prevent damage, just in time to acknowledge it. HR's leadership changed. The new head scheduled a meeting with me early on. "I want to be clear," she said. "We're rebuilding trust." I smiled politely. "Trust is built through behavior," I replied, "not statements." She nodded. "Fair enough." Erin and I had our first real fight in months. One evening over something small. Dishes, timing, tone. But underneath it was something bigger. "You don't need me the same way," he said. I didn't deny it. "And you don't need me to disappear for you to feel strong." I replied. That hit harder. We sat quietly after that. The next morning, he apologized. Not for the argument, for assuming I'd always be the foundation. That mattered. Weeks passed. Life normalized. And then I heard through a mutual contact that Lily was struggling to find work. Her name was flagged. Questions followed her. Why did you leave so suddenly? Why was your tenure so short? She wasn't unemployable, but she was marked, and I hated that part. Not because I wanted her saved, but because I recognized the system doing what it always does. Protecting itself, sacrificing individuals. The company didn't collapse. It adapted. Mark didn't resurface. Neither did Lily. I stayed, not out of loyalty, out of clarity, because I wasn't invisible anymore, and the cost of replacing me had been documented, audited, and quietly absorbed into policy changes that would outlive everyone involved. One night, lying in bed, Aaron asked me if I ever regretted not fighting harder at the beginning. I thought about it. No, I said. I regret believing that being essential made me safe. He nodded. That's a hard lesson, he said. Yes, I replied, but a permanent one. And that was the truth. The revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't end with shouting or triumph. It ended with systems rewritten, careers rerouted, and assumptions dismantled. And once that happens, there's no undoing it. After Lily, after Mark, after the audit, things didn't explode. They quieted, and that was somehow harder to adjust to. There were no more emergencies every morning. No frantic calls. No last-minute rescues that made people grateful for 5 minutes before forgetting again. My calendar had space in it. Real space. The kind that used to make me nervous. For the first few weeks, I kept expecting something to go wrong. I'd wake up early, heart already racing, mentally scanning for problems before my feet hit the floor. But there weren't any fires waiting for me anymore. The systems worked. The redundancies held. Other people owned their responsibilities. I had done my job too well this time. And without constant chaos to distract me, I started noticing things I'd ignored for years. Like how tired I actually was. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that settles into your bones after years of being hyper-reliable. Of always being the one who remembered. Followed up, smoothed over, fixed it quietly. I hadn't just been doing extra work. I'd been carrying emotional weight that didn't belong to me. At work, people treated me differently now. More carefully. They asked before adding things to my plate. They documented requests. They hesitated before assuming I'd pick up slack. Some of them resented it. I could feel it. There were subtle comments. Jokes about how by the book everything was now. How things used to be more flexible. I didn't correct them. Flexible had always meant someone else bending. And that someone had been me. One afternoon, a junior employee knocked on my office door. She looked nervous. I don't want to bother you, she said, but I'm not sure who to ask. I gestured for her to come in. She explained an issue that would have automatically landed on my desk a year earlier. Something that crossed departments. A messy handoff. No clear owner. I listened carefully. Then I said something that felt strange coming out of my mouth. This isn't mine, I said, but I can tell you who owns it. Her shoulders relaxed. That's okay, she asked. Yes, I said. That's how it's supposed to work. She thanked me and left. I sat there for a moment afterward, realizing how much of my identity had been wrapped up in being the final safety net. Who was I if I wasn't that? At home, the shift was even more noticeable. Aaron was doing better at work, confident again, engaged, but the balance between us had changed, and we were still figuring out what that meant. One evening, he came home excited about a project he'd been assigned. They asked me to lead it, he said. I think it could really go somewhere. I smiled and told him I was proud, and I meant it. But later, lying in bed, I realized something uncomfortable. For years, I had downplayed my own ambition so his struggles wouldn't feel heavier. I'd made myself smaller without even noticing. And now that I wasn't doing that anymore, the contrast was obvious. We weren't out of sync. We were just no longer arranged around my exhaustion. My mother called less often, not because she needed me less, but because I stopped rushing in to fix things before she even asked. The first time I told her I couldn't help with something immediately, she sounded hurt, then annoyed, then quiet. A week later, she told me she'd figured it out on her own. There was pride in her voice. I should have set that boundary years earlier. Work continued. The board requested quarterly reviews, transparency reports, cross-functional updates. I led them efficiently, without martyrdom. And slowly the narrative shifted. Not about me, about the company. People stopped saying, "She holds everything together." They started saying the system works. That was the point. One afternoon, HR asked if I'd be willing to speak on a panel about leadership resilience. I almost laughed. Instead, I declined. "I don't want to be positioned as a cautionary tale," I said, "or a success story. I just did my job." They didn't push. That was new too. Aaron and I had a conversation one Sunday that we'd been avoiding. It wasn't a fight. It was quieter than that. "I think you scared me," he said. I didn't interrupt. "You changed," he continued, "and I didn't know where I fit anymore." I nodded. "I changed because I had to," I said, "not because I wanted to leave you behind." He looked at me for a long moment. "I leaned on you too much," he admitted, "and when you stopped holding everything up, I felt exposed." That honesty mattered. "I'm still here," I said. "I'm just not carrying us both." We sat together after that, not fixing anything immediately, just letting the truth exist. Months passed. The story at work became old news. New problems took its place, but something lingered. People were more careful about replacements now. They asked questions. They documented transitions. They thought twice before assuming knowledge could be extracted without consequence. I overheard a manager once say, "We can't afford another situation like that." They never said my name. They didn't need to. One evening, I opened my laptop and scrolled through old files, emails from years ago, versions of processes I'd created when no one was watching. I didn't feel bitterness. I felt distance. That version of me felt familiar but unreachable, like an old house you grew up in but could never live in again. Aaron came into the room and asked what I was doing. "Letting go," I said. He nodded like he understood. Because he did. The thing about quiet revenge is that it doesn't restore what was taken. It clarifies what was. It teaches you the cost of silence. And once you understand that cost, you can't unlearn it. You can't go back to being the person who believes loyalty will protect them. You can't unknow how replaceable people think you are until replacement becomes expensive. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't triumphant either. I was awake, and that, more than anything, was permanent. The first time I realized the story had outgrown me was during a meeting I wasn't even supposed to lead. It was a cross-department review, routine on the surface, process updates, risk mitigation, the kind of meeting that used to drain me because I'd end up answering for everyone. I sat back and listened. People spoke differently now. They referenced documentation instead of memory. They asked who owned what instead of assuming I did. They flagged uncertainties early instead of hoping I'd catch them later. And then someone said it. "We can't shortcut this," a manager said. "We don't want another situation where one person holds all the knowledge and gets quietly replaced." No one looked at me, but everyone knew. That was when it hit me. The revenge wasn't just permanent because of what happened to Mark or Lily. It was permanent because it changed how people behaved when I was in the room. That's real power, not being feared, being remembered. After that meeting, a board member asked me to stay back for a moment. She closed the door gently and smiled. "You've shifted the culture here," she said. I shook my head. "I didn't intend to," I replied. "I just stopped compensating for gaps." She studied me. "That's how culture changes," she said. "When the person who's been holding everything up lets the structure reveal itself." I thought about that later on my drive home. How many times in my life had I prevented consequences without realizing it? At work, at home, everywhere. Aaron noticed the shift too. He came home one evening quieter than usual. "They're reorganizing my department," he said. "Roles are changing." I waited. "They asked who owns what," he continued. And for the first time, I didn't just say yes to everything. I smiled slightly, and I asked. "And it felt strange," he said, "but good." That mattered more to me than I expected, because this hadn't just changed me, it had changed the people around me. My mother surprised me one afternoon by showing up unannounced. Not with a crisis, with lunch. "I was in the area," she said. "I thought we could eat together." We sat at the kitchen table, talking about nothing important. At one point, she paused and looked at me carefully. "You don't rush any more," she said. I laughed softly. "No," I replied. "I don't." She nodded. "I worried when you stopped," she admitted. "But now I see you seem steadier." That word stayed with me. Steady. Not exhausted. Not frantic. Steady. At work, HR finalized the last of the policy changes. Mandatory transition periods. Shadowing requirements. No unilateral leadership handovers without oversight. They called it risk mitigation. I called it overdue. One afternoon, I found an old email chain while searching for something else. Mark's name was everywhere. Requests, decisions, short approvals, then silence. It struck me how completely he'd vanished. No industry rumors, no consulting role, no public rebound. Just gone. People like to believe careers end loudly. They usually don't. They fade. And Lily? I heard through someone else that she'd taken a job outside the industry. Lower profile. Less pressure. Starting over. I hoped she learned something. Not from me. From the speed at which confidence can be mistaken for readiness. Aaron and I took a weekend away together. Nothing fancy. Just space. On the second night, sitting in a quiet restaurant, he reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm glad you didn't break," he said. I frowned slightly. "I didn't break," I replied. "I bent for too long." He nodded. "I won't ask you to do that again." That promise mattered, because quiet revenge doesn't just punish others. It teaches you who deserves access to your effort. Back at work, a new hire was introduced. Smart, capable, eager. Someone suggested I train her. I agreed, but this time I did it differently. I documented everything. I looped leadership in. I made ownership visible. I didn't let knowledge live only in me. Not again. One afternoon, the new hire asked me something that made me pause. "Why does everyone here double-check transitions now?" she asked. "It feels intense." I smiled. "It's cheaper than pretending people are replaceable," I said. She laughed, not fully understanding. She would. Eventually. Weeks passed, then months. The story settled into something people referenced indirectly. A lesson, a warning, a precedent, and I realized something important. I didn't need closure conversations. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need acknowledgement beyond what already existed in policy, behavior, and memory. The system had learned. At home, Aaron and I fell into a rhythm that felt healthier than anything we'd had before. Not because things were perfect, but because we were both responsible for ourselves. One evening, he asked if I ever wished I'd left when everything went down. I shook my head. "No," I said. "Leaving would have let them believe they were right." He nodded slowly. "I get that now." I thought about the title people would see on a screen. I had trained my replacement without knowing. The revenge was quiet but permanent. And I smiled, because the real revenge wasn't survival. It was correction. It was letting the truth surface without forcing it. It was staying long enough for the lesson to stick. And it had. I didn't realize how much of my life had been shaped by fear until it was gone. Not obvious fear, not panic or dread. The The quiet kind. The kind that keeps you useful so no one questions your place. The kind that convinces you being needed is the same as being valued. For years, I'd lived inside that fear without naming it. If I keep everything running, I'll be safe. If I make myself indispensable, I won't be replaced. If I don't complain, I won't be targeted. None of it was true. The moment they decided to replace me, all of that effort became irrelevant. My loyalty didn't slow them down. My silence didn't protect me. My usefulness didn't save me. Understanding that didn't make me bitter. It made me precise. At work, I became intentional in a way I never had before. Not aggressive, not defensive, just deliberate. I said no when something wasn't mine. I said yes when it was. I documented. I delegated. I required clarity before commitment. And in doing so, I noticed something surprising. People respected me more. Not because I was kinder or more accommodating, because I was clearer. Clarity, I learned, is a form of power. One afternoon, a senior manager asked me how I handled the stress of the past year so calmly. I thought about it for a moment. I stopped confusing responsibility with obligation, I said. He nodded like he was filing that away. At home, the changes showed up in unexpected ways. I started sleeping better. Not perfectly, but deeply. The kind of sleep that doesn't feel like collapse. The kind that feels like rest. Aaron noticed it too. "You don't grind your teeth anymore," he said one morning. I laughed. "I guess I don't," I replied. We talked more openly now. Not just about logistics or stress, but about how close we'd come to drifting into something neither of us recognized. "You carried so much alone," he said once. "I didn't see it. I didn't show it," I replied. That was my part. My mother started asking for advice instead of rescue. That shift alone changed our dynamic. "I can handle this," she'd say. "I just wanted your opinion." And I gave it, without taking over. I realized how many relationships had been structured around my overfunctioning. When I stopped doing that, everything recalibrated. Some people stepped up, some stepped back, some disappeared entirely, and that was okay. At work, a small but telling moment happened during a leadership workshop. The facilitator asked the group to define sustainable leadership. People offered answers: transparency, accountability, support. Then someone added, not building systems that depend on one person silently doing everything. There was a pause, then nods. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The lesson had embedded itself. I thought about Lily again, not with resentment, but with distance. She was a chapter, a catalyst, someone who showed me how easily power can be borrowed without understanding its cost. I hoped she found her footing somewhere safer. Mark crossed my mind too. I wondered if he understood what happened, if he ever connected the dots between his shortcuts and his disappearance, or if he blamed circumstance instead of choices. It didn't matter. The outcome was the same. I was invited to speak at a small internal event about knowledge management. I agreed, not as a survivor, not as a warning, but as someone who'd learned something useful. I talked about documentation, about redundancy, about protecting people by protecting systems. I didn't tell my story. I didn't have to. Afterward, someone thanked me quietly. "This should have been obvious," they said. But it wasn't. I smiled. "It rarely is," I replied. Aaron and I took another weekend away. This time, we talked about the future. Not in big dramatic terms. Just possibilities. Trips. Changes. Small shifts that felt achievable instead of overwhelming. "You don't sound trapped anymore," he said. "I'm not," I replied. That was the truth. Not trapped by work. Not trapped by expectations. Not trapped by the need to prove my worth through exhaustion. I'd proven something else instead. That when you stop cushioning the consequences of other people's decisions, reality steps in. And reality is a better teacher than any confrontation. The quiet revenge wasn't about watching people fall. It was about letting gravity exist. And gravity doesn't need anger. It just needs you to step aside. One evening, I sat alone with a glass of wine, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Office events, team lunches, smiling faces from years ago. I didn't feel nostalgic. I felt grateful. Grateful that version of me survived long enough to become this one. Grateful I didn't disappear quietly. Grateful I stayed long enough for the truth to become permanent. Because that's what made it revenge. Not the demotions, not the resignations, not the policy changes, but the fact that the system learned. And systems don't forget. By the time everything finally stopped shaking, I understood something that took me years to admit. Revenge doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives quietly. Sometimes it lasts forever. After the restructuring announcement, the office didn't explode the way people expect in movies. No shouting, no public firings, no dramatic escorting of boxes to the elevator. What happened instead was worse. The kind of slow collapse you only recognize when you're standing in the ruins. On paper, the company stabilized. In reality, it hollowed out. The replacement I trained, Evan, was still sitting in my old seat. Same desk, same title, same responsibilities, but the authority behind that title was gone. Clients stopped asking for him by name. Senior leadership stopped looping him into decisions. Meetings he used to lead were quietly reassigned to committees. No one explained it to him. That was the cruelest part. He kept thinking he was missing something. Some invisible test. Some unspoken expectation he hadn't met yet. I knew exactly what it was. Institutional trust had evaporated. The audit hadn't just exposed misconduct. It exposed dependency. The company had built too much of its operational knowledge around one person, me, then tried to replace that knowledge with a human copy-paste. It doesn't work like that. Processes without judgment fail. Training without context collapses. Documentation without lived experience becomes fiction. I had left behind everything they asked for. Manuals, SOPs, recorded walkthroughs, emergency procedures, decision trees. What I hadn't left behind was instinct. You can't train someone how to feel when a client is lying. You can't document when to push back versus when to stay silent. You can't spreadsheet timing. Those things only reveal themselves when something goes wrong. And things were going wrong. At first, it was small. A delayed approval here. A misinterpreted clause there. A vendor who stopped responding after one poorly handled escalation. Evan compensated by working longer hours, staying later, sending emails at midnight. Management praised his dedication. But dedication doesn't replace competence. It just delays consequences. The first real break came with a client I used to handle personally. A family-owned business. Emotional, volatile, loyal, but only when they felt understood. They requested a change to their contract structure. Not unusual. They did it every year. Evan followed the documented process. He sent the template response, asked for clarification, scheduled a meeting 2 weeks out. 2 weeks was too late. They pulled their account. No warning. No negotiation. Just gone. Leadership scrambled. They reviewed the correspondence. Technically, Evan had done nothing wrong, but the client told them something interesting on the exit call. We felt like we were talking to someone who didn't know us. That sentence circulated quietly. It wasn't an accusation. It was worse. It was a realization. That happened again and again. Different clients, different issues, same pattern. The company wasn't failing loudly. It was bleeding out in silence. And Evan was blamed without being blamed. Performance improvement plans weren't issued. No official reprimands. Instead, responsibilities were redistributed. A little here, a little there. His role became narrower, less visible. The same job title, a smaller shadow. I watched this from my desk, untouched. No one came to me for help. They couldn't, because helping would have meant admitting the mistake. And they were never going to do that. What surprised me most was how little satisfaction I felt. Not relief, not triumph, just a steady, heavy calm. Because I knew this wasn't about me anymore. It was about consequences. Quiet ones. Permanent ones. The final shift happened about 9 months after I trained my replacement. It came in the form of a new initiative. Something leadership framed as innovation. A cross-functional task force. New systems. External consultants. Translation. We don't trust what we built anymore. Consultants interviewed everyone, including me. That was the first time in over a year someone in authority asked me a direct question about my old role. What challenges did you face that weren't documented? One of them asked. I answered honestly. I talked about nuance, judgment, relationship management, risk anticipation. I didn't complain. I didn't accuse. I explained. They listened, and they took notes. Weeks later, their final report circulated. It never mentioned my name, but it referenced loss of tacit knowledge due to premature role transition. That phrase became a problem, because it couldn't be undone. You can rehire, you can restructure, you can retrain, but once trust erodes, once clients detach, once internal confidence fractures, the cost compounds. Evan didn't last much longer. Not because he was fired, because he burned out. The workload hadn't killed him. The isolation did. Being responsible without authority. Accountable without control. He resigned quietly. No goodbye email. No farewell meeting. His desk was cleared after hours. The role remained vacant for 6 months. 6 months of scrambling. Patchwork coverage. Lost opportunities. During that time, no one asked me to step back in. Not officially, but I noticed something. Decisions started routing past me, then around me, then eventually back to me informally. Can I get your thoughts on this? Have you seen this before? What would you do here? No title change, no announcement, just gravity reasserting itself. I answered when it made sense. I declined when it didn't. I didn't rush. I had learned something powerful. Visibility without protection is a trap. Competence without boundaries is a liability. Eventually, leadership tried to formalize it. A conversation, carefully worded. We recognize the value you bring, they said. We'd like to expand your influence. They didn't offer my old role. They couldn't. Instead, they offered something quieter. Autonomy, defined scope, clear authority, no succession planning without my consent. I agreed, not because I needed the validation, but because I understood leverage now. The revenge wasn't that they failed. It was that they learned, and that learning cost them more than they ever saved. As for me, I never raised my voice. I never exposed anyone publicly. I never sabotaged anything. I trained my replacement exactly as asked. I followed every instruction. I let the system experience the consequences of its own decisions. That's what made it permanent. No one could accuse me of bitterness. No one could rewrite the story to make me the villain, because the evidence lived in outcomes. Quiet, undeniable, final. Sometimes people ask why I stayed, why I didn't walk away, why I didn't demand more. The answer is simple. Leaving would have been loud. Staying rewrote the balance of power. And if there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this. Being underestimated is painful, but being indispensable again, on your own terms, is devastating in a way no argument ever could be. I didn't win by fighting. I won by letting the truth surface on its own. And it always does. Eventually. Now let me ask you something. If you were in my position, would you have spoken up earlier and risked being dismissed? Or would you have stayed quiet and let the system collapse under the weight of its own choices? Drop your comments below and also like and subscribe. Do you think quiet revenge is more powerful than loud justice? Tell me what you would have done.